All right, in this explainer, we are diving into one of the most misunderstood but also one of the most powerful chapters of the Bhagavad Gita. We're going to unpack the ideas of divine and demonic tendencies, but not as some ancient myth. We're looking at them as a surprisingly practical psychological framework that you can use in your own life right now. Let's get into it.
So, to really get what's going on, let's just quickly remember where we left off. The last chapter dropped this huge idea on us, that your real identity, who you truly are, isn't your body, it's not the modes of nature or the gunas, and it's definitely not the temporary roles you play. You are that stable, conscious reality that exists behind all of that.
Okay, so that brings up a massive, very practical question. If you have this incredible spiritual insight about who you really are, then what? What's next? How is that understanding supposed to actually show up in your day-to-day life? I mean, does it even matter? Well, Krishna's answer is super direct and really clarifying. He says, yes, it matters. And this understanding shows up through two basic patterns of consciousness, these two broad tendencies that he calls the divine and the demonic. And let me just say this right from the start. He is absolutely not talking about literal angels and demons with wings and horns.
And this brings us to the first major thing we have to get straight. This whole framework, it isn't about moral preaching or judging people as good or bad. I want you to think of it more like a diagnostic tool. Krishna is giving us a map, so we can see which of our own inner pathways are leading us toward freedom, and which ones are leading us deeper into bondage and suffering. It's all about direction.
And you can see how this one little shift reframes the entire conversation. You know, the old mythological view sees these external beings, right? Good versus evil, which always leads to judgment. But the psychological view, which is what Krishna is really getting at, sees internal patterns that are born from either clarity or confusion. And that allows for diagnosis, not condemnation. Big difference.
So the whole goal here is just incredibly practical. It's about giving us the self-awareness to see which of our habits, our thoughts, our impulses, which ones are actually lining us up with reality and making us freer, and which ones are doing the complete opposite. It's a guide for self-improvement, not a rulebook for judging others.
All right, so let's dig into the details of these two human patterns. Let's break down the actual characteristics that come from a state of clarity versus a state of confusion.
So first up, this divine tendency. Now, it's so important that you just forget any ideas about supernatural powers or halos or anything like that. In this context, divine just means qualities that are deeply, authentically human and are aligned with the truth of how things really are. And you know the key sign of these qualities? They naturally, automatically reduce our inner conflict.
So Krishna lists off a few of these, and just listen to how grounded they are. Fearlessness, but the kind that comes from clarity, not from arrogance. Self-restraint, honesty, compassion, humility, steadiness. You see, these aren't weak or passive traits. They're signs of a mind that's stable and in harmony with itself.
And this shows you the real-world result. A person who is cultivating these divine tendencies can act decisively without being cruel. They can be in a position of power without being corrupted by it. They can disagree with someone passionately without it turning into hatred. Now, this doesn't mean they're perfect, not at all, but it does mean they're self-aware and they're accountable.
Okay, so now let's flip the coin and look at the other side. This demonic tendency, again, is completely human. It's not about being inherently evil. Instead, it's a whole set of behaviors and attitudes that spring directly from that core confusion of identity we talked about. That fundamental mistake of believing that you are just your body, just your ego, just the roles you play.
The qualities that come from this confusion, they're probably going to look pretty familiar. I mean, look at this list. Each one isn't just a bad trait. No, it's a direct symptom of that mistaken identity. Arrogance and entitlement, that comes from seeing yourself as the absolute center of the world. Aggression is just a defense of that fragile ego. Dishonesty is what you use to keep up the false image. And a lack of accountability, well, that's just the ego refusing to ever be wrong. It's a mind that is fundamentally at war with itself.
And it all really comes down to this. This is the core belief. It's like the internal operating system that's running the entire demonic pattern. I am the center of the universe. I deserve whatever I want without any limits, and I am not accountable for my actions or what happens because of them. When you start from that place of deep confusion, harmful actions just naturally follow.
So where does that leave us? Well, it brings us to the choice that we make every single day. And it is so critical to understand that Krishna is not laying down some system of divine reward and punishment here. He's simply explaining the law of cause and effect, but how it applies to our own consciousness.
This analogy is just perfect. Think about it. If you decide you're going to ignore the law of gravity and you step off a roof, gravity doesn't punish you, right? You just experience the natural, unavoidable consequence of that choice. In exactly the same way, when we ignore the ethical structure of reality, things like honesty and compassion, it just inevitably leads to personal and societal collapse.
And please, don't think for a second this is just some ancient philosophical idea. We see these two patterns playing out on the world stage every single day. The demonic tendency, it shows up as things like unchecked corporate greed or the abuse of authority. And the divine tendency, that shows up as ethical leadership, restraint with power, and a culture of real, genuine accountability. So after all of this deep analysis, the crucial takeaway is actually very simple. Every single choice, every thought, every action, it's like you're casting a vote. You are constantly feeding one of these two patterns inside yourself. And what you consistently feed, well, that's what becomes your character, your reality, and your destiny. So let's just nail this down. The message of this entire chapter is absolutely unmistakable. Spiritual clarity is totally meaningless if it doesn't actually translate into ethical character. Understanding without self-restraint is dangerous, power without humility is destructive, and intelligence without accountability will eventually corrode everything it touches.
And so, this whole explainer really leaves us with one powerful, personal question. And it's not about judging anyone else. It's about looking inward with total honesty. In your thoughts, in your words, and in your actions day after day, which tendencies are you feeding?
There is so much more to uncover here. In our next explainer, we're going to dig even deeper into why those demonic tendencies can be so compelling and how they actually trap people in these repetitive cycles of suffering, often hardening ignorance into a kind of defiant self-justification. I'll see you then.